Alright, so in today's video we're going to go over how to get started laying out for our chimenea. Um, we're going to be using a couple of new things in VCarve, so I'll be going over that. I've got the dimensions here. These are in Schoology in the assignment, so you can always refer back to the dimensions to get these correct. So let's get started. So I've got VCarve open here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. I want my file size to be 48 by 48, so 4 feet by 4 feet. That's everything needs to fit on this piece of metal here. The thickness doesn't matter. We're just going to make the thickness 0.1 and then make sure that the use offset is not checked. And then we just go ahead and click OK. So one of the things that we're going to use that's a little bit new that we haven't used before is our guidelines. And our guidelines, we can, if we click on the rulers on the side or on the top, we can bring our guidelines in. And depending on where you're zoomed, generally they'll snap every inch, which is good, which is what we want, at least for right now. That's what we want to use. So I'm just going to bring these in. I'm going to snap my first one to 0. And my chimney is going to be 15 inches wide. So I want another one to snap to 15. Okay, so those are my vertical. So that's going to represent my base here. I need 2 more vertical guidelines. And where I'm going to install, I want one to snap for this point and this point here. So this is 5 inches across. So I need those to snap in at 5 inches off of my outside line. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this in, and this one's going to go to 5 inches here, and then this one's going to slide and snap to 10. So I've got 5, 10, 15 inches. I'm just trying to keep things simple, keep it easy. So I've got my 3 vertical guidelines. So now I want to install a couple horizontal guidelines. I do want to, so now I'm going to click on the horizontal ruler. I'm going to snap one to 0, and the total height is 32. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag one down to 32. So this is where we're going to start. I'm just going to zoom in, make things a little bit easier to see. So this is where we're going to start. So I've got my guidelines all set up. I'm going to grab my line tool. So draw line / polyline. So I'm going to click on that. And one of the things that we want to keep a close eye on is our cursor. So you can see what our cursor looks like right now. If I come over to my guidelines, you can see how the cursor kind of changes. All right. And you can see there's a solid line going vertically through that circle. That means it's snapping to my guideline. Now I want it to snap where these 2 guidelines meet up. If you watch closely, you'll see that cursor change again. So now it's going to snap exactly to that guideline. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to start to draw out my line. And now what I want to do is snap to my 0 guideline here and my 0 guideline on the bottom. So this is where you really have to keep a close eye on what your cursor looks like. I'm going to click again. Now I'm going to drag straight across until that cursor changes and it snaps onto that point. All right, and you can even see it. It'll tell you what the overall dimensions are of that. So I'm going to click again, drag that up to where these 2 meet here. All right, again, making sure that, so right now it's just snapping to my horizontal line. I want to make sure it also snaps to that vertical line. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to close this in. So drag straight across. All right, now you might get one of 2 symbols here. I like to see that I get that little kind of square off to the polyline icon, and that's telling me it's snapping to that point. And I click and it basically closes in that shape. So if I click close and I just have my cursor, if I click on it, it will select my entire shape. All right. So from here, I no longer need these guidelines. So I want to delete these. So if I go up to view and I go down to guidelines and I go delete all guides. So now you can see I went through and I was able to delete all of those guides. You can leave them, but it just makes things a little bit easier, makes it a bit cleaner to keep those in. So again, I just went over putting some guidelines in. So from here, what I would do is go ahead and save. So I recommend to go ahead and do that. Make sure you save to your Google Drive. Once you have that saved, come back and then continue with getting this finish laying this out. Okay, so I went ahead and saved. So now what I want to do is I need to lay out two more things here. So what I'm looking to lay out next is this opening here, all right, as well as this opening that's up here. So I'm going to start with this opening up here. This one's fairly simple, so I'm going to do this one first. For this opening here, it's basically just a 4-inch by 2-inch rectangle that's aligned to the top. So to create that, I go into VCarve. And what I'm going to do is grab the rectangle tool, and so I'm going to go ahead and type in a 4-inch wide by 2-inch tall rectangle. Go ahead and click create. So once that's created, I can go ahead and close. So now what I want to do is I want to select the rectangle I just drew, push and hold the shift key on my keyboard, and select the overall outside shape of the chimenea. So what I'm going to do is use the line up tool to align the top of this rectangle to the top here as well as centered. So I grab my align and select objects tool, okay, and what I want to do is center. So if you look, it says align to selection, and I know we've used align to material before. We're not going to use that right now. We're going to use align to selection, and I want to center those two. So I click that. Nothing moved because they're already centered. And now if you look, align to inside edge. So what that's going to do is place that rectangle right at the top of the inside edge. Now it is important to make sure you select your objects in the order that I went through. Select your rectangle first, then select the outside line for your chimenea. If you do that reversed, it's going to move the chimenea down to the small rectangle. So now I click close, and the next thing I want to do is just trim this top here. So I go over here to my interactive vector trim tool. Looks like a pair of scissors. I select that, and once those scissors open up, I click, and I'm just going to do that again because I have two lines there. And what that does is that trims those off, and it gives me that little opening for my my small cap to sit on. So now that I did that, I would just go ahead. I'm just going to click the save button so I can save that work. So next, what I want to do is I want to line up, and I want to create this opening that's here. Okay, so to create that, this is a little bit tricky. It does take a little bit of practice. So what I need to do is I'm going to use my guidelines, and I'm going to lay one out that's 3 inches from the bottom, and then 12 inches from that line. That will give me those two guidelines. So that's 3, and then that would be 15. All right, because 12 plus 3 is 15. So I go in here, I grab my horizontal guide, and I'm going to bring one to 3 inches, and I'm going to bring the other one to 15. So those are my two horizontal guidelines. So now what I want to do is I want a guideline that is 3 inches from this line, but on that, in that same diagonal. Okay, so if I right click on that line and I go down here and it says guidelines. So I want to insert an angled guideline. So if you look here, it says through 2 points. So I want to select that. I want to click on this bottom point here, and I'm going to click on this top point here. Now make sure that cursor changes. So now you can see I went ahead and I created that guideline right along the edge. And I'm going to do the same thing on this edge because it's going to make life a little bit easier. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to go down to guidelines, insert angled, through 2 points. Again, watch that cursor change. So I make sure it snaps to that node or the end of that line, and I click. You can see it does that line perfectly with that angle. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on this guideline. I'm going to right click on it. All right, so you can see that's selecting my guideline. I got that little arrow. So what I want to do, it tells me the angle, which is neat. All right, what I want to do is I want to install a guideline relative to this. So that's down here. I'm going to install one of those, and I want it to be 3 inches off of that. So I'm going to select the position / offset. I'm going to type in 3, and I'm going to click create new guide. And you could see what that did was it kind of installed that there. So I'll show you how to do that again. Oops. All right, so I'm going to delete this guide. So if I hover over that line, it gives me that kind of angled arrow. If I right click, all right, let me move this off to the side so you can really see it show up. I want it to be relative to that guide. I only want to do 1, 3 inches, create new guide, and that's going to drop that right there. So now I could go ahead and click close. So now what I'm going to do is grab that polyline, and I'm going to snap to the end here and draw that line around. So I grab my polyline tool. Again, you could see how see how the cursor is here, and then once it snaps to that, all right, that cursor is going to change. I click, drag across, click, drag down, click again, drag across, and notice how that cursor changes. Really have to keep a close eye on it. All right, so then I'm going to right click to close out of that tool. So now all I have to do is trim this little section right here. So I go to my interactive trim, trim that off, close that out, go up to view, guides, delete all guides. So now when I select this, notice how everything's joined, everything's connected, it's all selected as one object. Just to make sure that everything is joined, I go over to the join open vectors. I select that. I have one closed vector, which is perfect. So I click close. So now I'll just go ahead, save again. So now I've got the start of what I want to do here. All right. So check back for the next video. I'll go over how we're going to mirror. We need to create one that's closed off, that doesn't have an opening. And I'll show you how you can do that right from this. And then I'll show us how we're going to align everything so it lines up like what you see here, because it has to be laid out exactly like this. I like to do it this way. So we'll go over how we're going to start to rotate, mirror, and start to move some of our objects so that they'll show up exactly like what you see here. That's it.